How do we manage retention? The most important thing to start with is getting upper management to pay attention. Again, in some organizations, they don't believe that human capital matters as much as raw materials and accounting and marketing and manufacturing and all those kinds of things. They kind of forget that the people side of this thing is really important and it is central to getting work done. I've worked in organizations like this where they didn't care if people left. They wouldn't do the right things to make sure people would be retained. So that's part of the problem. So we have to, first of all, get upper management to pay attention. Get them to recognize that when we increase retention, that they save money, and that there's a high cost when people leave. All the direct and indirect costs that we just talked about, people having to cover for somebody else and they are less productive on their job, or they have to work longer hours in order to make things work. So these are the things to consider on that. Now, management support's key because they're the ones that are the role models. They're the ones that lead the way and they set the tone for the way things go in the organization. So what you need to do is look at your turnover rate, look at the industry turnover rate, and compare and contrast, because there is data available for industry turnover rates to know how well you're doing. And if you are having a higher turnover than people in your industry, that should tell you something is going on in the way that you conduct business and in the way that you treat your human capital, that people are not willing to stay and to continue to work for you. So knowing what the industry turnover rate is, or what the local turnover rate is, right? If people are leaving to go to work in different industries, why are they leaving? What are they getting paid? Doing exit interviews is a good way to learn about the reasons why, but we have to start with getting top management to pay attention to this and to give it their focus so that we can retain good, engaged workers who want to be there and want to do a good job. So once we get top management on board, what are things that we can do that can make a difference, that stops voluntary turnover? Making sure we pay people fairly and well. Go back to the lectures on motivation, right? We need to make sure that pay is off the table as a problem, because when we don't pay people fairly, it's very difficult to get other things to motivate them when they are dissatisfied with their pay and benefits to begin with. Working conditions are also really important. Are people under stress? Is it a toxic environment? Is it too hot, too cold, too dirty, too stressful? All sorts of working conditions issues. And when we talk about unionization, what you'll see is when there is poor pay, poor benefits, poor working conditions, this is the context where a union can squeeze in the door and organize a company that clearly is not doing what they should for their employees. The next item they talk about here is the Great Resignation. I just hate that term, but I will talk about what it basically means. It means workers are disengaged. They're dissatisfied, they're unmotivated, they're disengaged for a whole host of reasons. And as we get to the discussion about engagement at the end of this module, at the end of this lecture series for retention, you'll see that there are things the organization can do that can have an impact on engagement. And once we increase engagement, you are less likely to see this quote-unquote Great Resignation, because people have been disengaged in the past history. This wasn't just a phenomenon in the pandemic. Now, was it a larger issue during the pandemic? For a whole host of reasons, absolutely yes. Because by and large, if people have the choice between working for minimum wage and getting yelled and screamed at and risking their life working during a pandemic, or, being on unemployment, good grief, I'd take unemployment, right? I wouldn't want to work in an environment like that. And that's what a lot of people were realizing. The pandemic peeled back the layers and the facade that said, oh, people are happily working, and in which case, once you add in health risks and life risks with a pandemic, that was the last straw for people. They're like, no, I will tolerate this to a point, but now that you're asking me to do this and risk my life, I'm not so willing to do that. So I think this Great Resignation, it was really just a function of disengagement that was exacerbated by the pandemic. But people are still disengaged. People still want to resign. People still don't want to stay in a company that doesn't treat them well. So let's not make this a bigger phenomenon than it really was. It really is an issue of making sure we have context for our workers to feel motivated, that they feel accepted and that they belong, and that ultimately they are getting the support that they need. When we do engagement and attitude and motivation surveys and climate surveys and things like that, these start to give us clues that there may be a problem downstream. So we do these engagement and attitude surveys not because we have nothing better to do, but because this starts to give us a hint that there may be a problem rising. And I'll give you an example of this. I got called into a client's office a couple of months ago, and they said, we did an engagement survey after our last leader left, and we wanted to see what people's reactions were to that past leader and what that could tell us to help our new leader do differently. And lo and behold, they started to find that there was dissatisfaction with supervisors. They didn't like the way supervisors were treating them. Now, was the change huge? No, it was actually a small change, but it was a change in the wrong direction. People were becoming more satisfied. So they looked at that and they said, this tells us that we are on the cusp of potentially having a problem. So what can you do to help us? And I went in and we talked about what the problem areas were, which I won't get into for privacy reasons, but we figured out what the problems were that were causing people to be dissatisfied with their supervisors, and we did some training and workshops on that topic to help manage those issues, and that made a big difference, they said. And so they didn't look at this as, oh my God, we're in a problem now. They said, oh my goodness, we could have a problem if we don't address the issues at this point in time. So look at the things that predict turnover, right? When people are not engaged, when people have a poor attitude, when they are unmotivated, you are more likely to see turnover start to happen. It is easier, as it says, to state the intention to leave than it is to act on it. So, which means that employees that have an internal locus of control, they feel like they can control things, or they are not caring what everybody thinks about them. They're going to go and they feel like they can control the things that are in front of them. They're more likely to leave. So we need to know who has high and low locus of controls. If there are people that have high internal locus of controls, they are more likely to leave because they believe that they can control their environment in a better way and that they are the master of their destiny, and they will go and they will make the changes as need to. So we need to be doing these pulse surveys or these annual surveys on a regular basis. Whether it's once a quarter we do a quick pulse, or once a year we do an annual survey of engagement and attitudes, doesn't matter. You figure out what cycle works for you. You should be tracking, obviously, in your metrics, tracking turnover rates and starting to see when there are some adjustments and changes in turnover rates, and then look at what you think are good predictors of turnover and be measuring those as well. As I mentioned earlier, exit interviews are a huge way that organizations investigate why people leave. Now, I would recommend that you don't have your HR department do the exit interviews. If you can contract with an outside vendor to do those exit interviews, you are more likely to get honest information from people. So you can bring in your consultant, you can have them come in, you can have them gather that data, and then they will compile the data, not give you individual feedback, but they will compile it in a report that say everybody who left the company in the last 6 months, these are their stated reasons why they left. So we have aggregate data of why people are exiting the company. So This will help us to make sure that we are addressing the problems as they arrive. Although your textbook argues that managers should do this, I would argue that that's a bad thing to do. In fact, I believe wholeheartedly it should be a third party, because people aren't going to be honest even to the HR department, let alone a manager or their boss's boss. That's just not going to happen. So I'm going to disagree with the textbook on this one entirely. But again, the goal is to not have somebody that somebody reports to be the person that they tell why they're leaving. I left a company and I reported it to HR that we did the exit interview, and I gave them the reasons why I was leaving. And that felt fine for me. I could be honest about the things that were bothering me, and they investigated it, and ultimately the person lost their job because of some of the reasons why, not just from me, but a host of different reasons why this person was asked to leave. There are some positions that we believe should have a mandatory exit interview, and obviously essential positions to the company that are high-paid workers that do some really important things for the company. These are the people that we want to retain, and if we're losing them, we need to know why. So there are some positions that we might deem mandatory for exit interviews. Maybe not the entry-level employee, but certainly middle-level and upper-level managers would be factors. I think everybody should get an exit interview, but that's not always the policy of companies. And at a minimum, you need to do those essential jobs that are really important and central to the mission of the company. You want to do the interview before they leave, right? So that they're still engaged, but they have the opportunity to share the information and have it collected. And again, we're going to analyze this, but not analyzing why did Robin leave, or why did Sam leave, or why did Peter leave. We want to look at, here's the reasons why the people who left the company in the last 6 months left. So we want to look at it in aggregate form rather than individualized. We also want to turn that on its head, and we're seeing more talk now about staying interviews, people who are choosing to stay. Why do people stay? So part of your pulse surveys can be, what keeps you coming back and working for this company? I get treated well, there's really great benefits, I love my pay, I love my coworkers, those sorts of things. So it's not enough to just figure out why people are leaving, but we also, from a positive perspective, want to know why they're staying. Another factor we should consider is this notion of person-job fit and person-organization fit. Fit matters. When we are hiring people, as we'll see when we get to the section on talent acquisition, we hire for job fit to make sure that they are qualified to do the job and have the skills necessary to do it. And we hire for fit into the company, to the company culture, to the company norms. So conscientious workers are the kind of organizational fit that we're looking for, people who have the right work ethic that match what we do and why we do it, the same ethical norms, the same values. So when we talk about fit, fit is really important, and we can set the tone for fit when we start recruiting people and setting the tone for what we expect people to do, and then from there we start to screen and hire people who have those skills. When there isn't fit, when people don't feel like they fit in, that they belong, that they're a part of things, that they have shared values and ideas, you're more likely to leave people, and we're going to start to see more voluntary turnover because of that. So you have to start with figuring out what are the competencies and the skills that I want to have, that people need to have, and then what are the norms and the culture issues that are valuable to us, so that we can hire people that match those culture and those norms and those values.